And we're back here on the Big Time Sports Podcast Show. Mitch Spinell and Mitchell Ballas. So, Mitch, what I want to start off with segment two, mostly an NFL centric segment, is the one interview that I saw yesterday that you sent me. It was from the newest episode of Pardon My Take, obviously the Big Barstool Sports Podcast, hosted by Big Cat and commentator, and they interviewed Cleveland Browns head coach Kevin Stefanski. I believe this is the first time he's ever been on the show. I can't imagine him being on at any other point. Just kind of knowing the personality that Kevin is compared to those two. But I think Kevin personally went in there and I don't think he blew away any people. This is kind of like par for the course with Kevin. He did just enough to kind of ride that line of, you can kind of get a good feeling of this guy. There were some points that I liked that he made. There was one point especially that he made that made me laugh. I want to get your thoughts though first. I mean, what did you think the image was of Stefanski after this interview?
I actually think I'm a little different than you here, Mitch. I think he showed more of a personality here than he's really shown in most interviews with the local media. In fact, I know there were local media members who were actually upset because they don't get this type of exclusive time with Kevin Stefanski. I mean, he was on the show, it looked like, for about roughly 40 minutes in the interview with the Pardon My Take crew. I thought he showed some character. He was kind of funny, laughing, especially towards the tail end when it got away from football, talking about a dog for his daughter that, Big Cat promised. I thought that was funny, but
and he got his
I thought,
daughter's name wrong too.
yeah.
Yeah, the whole
So
thing.
it was, I was actually entertained. I thought Kevin did touch on some things that were actually pretty intriguing. And I don't know why he would be slightly different here with an actual national company, we'll say, because Pardon My Take it's number one sports podcast in the world. They're entertaining, but at the same time, I thought there was a lot of good stuff, and I thought there was a couple of things that made me raise my eyebrow yesterday in some of his answers. So I'm intrigued to see what you thought, and what we kind of picked out of that was very interesting.
Well, I'm curious as to what raised your eyebrows because I mean, my thing yesterday was I was very focused in on when they kind of asked him about the particular play calling they might have had, which was a huge complaint last season because a lot of people thought that they did not run the ball enough with two Pro Bowl caliber tailbacks, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. And by the way, you could tell that Kareem's on his way out because he was not mentioned once by Stefanski in the present tense of this upcoming season. It was just kind of like we got guys like Njoku and Nick Chubb, and then that's it. No, but it was, in all seriousness, it was interesting to hear him kind of address the sort of complaints that we were hearing a lot of last season, particularly from our own mouths. It was Stefanski kind of addressing what was according to him a fallacy of the philosophy of trying to balance the run versus the pass. He said, quote, "That's a fallacy. You don't have to establish the run to throw," unquote. I mean, maybe not in today's NFL where we're more pass happy than ever before, and it's not as usual to kind of just start off with the basic run up the middle. But I'm still wondering if there could be more of a balance because he even went on to say, quote, "I think play action has been proven that you don't need to have a good running attack or be running the ball to get the linebackers and the safeties up," unquote. That might be true if you especially have a great quarterback talent in your league. If you have a Patrick Mahomes or a Joe Burrow or, someone along the lines of a Jalen Hurts. But I don't know, with the way the Browns quarterbacks were this season, and I give Jacoby credit for having to step in that point, and then Deshaun's probably going to be better this year than he was last year. I kind of looked at that and I was thinking to myself, yeah, you still could have maybe addressed that a little bit, especially in the game that they were referencing, which was the Saints loss in the wind, in the rain. He even said, like, we tried to go for the run and they were still stopping us. So we just figured, oh, let's try pass. So
I think that I agree with him to a certain degree of to throw the ball, to run the ball, to set up the pass, right? I think what you can look back on is the 2020 season. The Browns threw the ball to score. They ran the ball to win. For example, look back to that Tennessee Titan game in 2020 where Baker had 4 first half touchdown passes, right? The Titans thought the Browns were going to run it, and the Browns lit them up in the secondary, multiple touchdown passes, one to Hollywood Higgins that I can still vividly remember. DPJ scored in that game. It was just a very, very intriguing way. And then they ran the ball in the second half to run the clock down, keep the ball away from Tennessee. So I get that part. But Mitch, there are other times though, where it's like, what are we doing? And I think you look back to the Atlanta game, right? Fourth and goal from the 4, just kick the field goal, take the points. You lost that game by
Yeah.
3. It was interesting to see his take on everything. Obviously, we know how loved Nick Chubb is here for the fans. Well, it seems Kevin Stefanski feels the exact same way because he tells
Yes.
people Nick Chubb is my favorite player too. And we'll see, because there's been the reports all offseason the Browns want to go to this air raid offense, and they need to go get a speed wide receiver on the outside and more complementary pieces on the outside for Watson. We'll see what that brings. I didn't really take too much away from that. What I did take away was the fact that the guys often give any head coach they interview a lot of crap and put them in hypothetical situations that may or may not have already happened, a la the Packers in the NFC Championship game 2 years ago when they
Right.
kicked the field goal. And they asked Kevin Stefanski about his time management, Mitch, because we've been very critical of it. I think anybody that's a Browns fan has been very critical of Stefanski's management of the clock at certain times, or just game management in general. Kevin Stefanski said that, he used to play Madden,
Mm-hmm.
and that, that's how, I think it was PFT commenter that, recommended maybe having a 13-year-old up in the booth in your headset saying I would call timeout here. And Stefanski said, oh, I used to play Madden, I used that, blah, blah, blah. Like, no, you didn't, because you'd be better at time management if you did. He also, there's no way he was even good at Madden either. That's what I took away from this. Kevin Stefanski has to be an awful Madden player on whatever gaming system he played on, because the way he manages the clock in an actual game shows me that he probably botched a lot of time in Madden games, because he's truly, my biggest gripe is he is not a very good game manager because his head is always stuck in the call sheet.
We'll get to the call sheet in a minute. I was fixated on that mainly because Kevin's from the first era of coaches that genuinely could have been brought up with the Madden franchise. I mean, you talk about the guys who are in their mid 30s to mid 40s and even 50s now. When you were a kid, when Madden first really exploded, the first year Eddie George was on the cover, you were probably in your teens to early 20s, and that's when it was more of a time for you to play video games. And especially if you're a football guy, I could see that. I mean, there was 1.2 during that thing where I think they were referencing when you're in Madden. And if you remember this, help me out here, because they had this analogous theory. They were asking him, it's like, oh, if it's at this particular point. Oh, I remember. It was like, if you're down 14 with 2 minutes to go and you score a touchdown, do you kick an extra point or do you go for 2? And Stefanski said go for 2. And the guy's like, oh, yeah, I agree. And I sat there and I thought to myself, you do? Because I know the point is that you want to win the game.
It was down 13. Yeah, down 13 points.
No, I thought he said 14.
I thought it was 13, because if you get the 2, then an extra point wins it. If you don't get it, then a touchdown, an extra point ties it.
Okay, I'm gonna have to go back and listen to it, but I'm pretty sure I could have sworn it was 14 points, and then you get a touchdown. So it's down to what, 8? It would be down to 8 points at that point. So you're deciding to either go for 2 to make it potentially 6 or 8, or you take the field PAT, which makes it almost certainly 7. And I like that kind of highlighted the aggressiveness that Stefanski has kind of shown, for better or worse, over the last couple of years. It's just that when you don't get those conversions, when you're throwing a deep ball on 4th and 1 in Cincinnati, when you're, as you mentioned, in Atlanta, I get sort of frustrated with those sort of decisions sometimes, but there have been times that they've worked as well. You're just hoping that the team becomes refined enough that you can be more comfortable with that decision next year. You can have the sort of aggressive philosophy that teams like we saw in the Super Bowl, Kansas City and Philadelphia had, where even if it's a few more yards on 4th down, hey, let's try it. We can do this. And you're willing to take that risk.
Yeah, and I thought it was also interesting too when he was talking about trick plays. He said Andy Reid can do the ring around the rosy with his players because he's won a Super Bowl, right? He's proven he's been able to do that. And he goes, I don't know if I'd ever call a player where I'm having my offensive lineman go around in a circle before we do a play. I also thought it was intriguing that he talked about how he wants to boo himself along with the fans sometimes in terms of the trick plays he's run. And also that he made a mistake in calling the Amari Cooper pass against the Bengals on Monday Night Football, Michael Myers, which was very intriguing. And so for all Browns fans out there, whether you like Barstool Sports or Pardon My Take or not, I highly recommend just going and finding the segment of the interview with Stefanski, because I truly thought you got to know him a little bit better than we do as fans with local media. And I thought that, him opening up a little bit allowed you to see he is human. He admits he's made mistakes. And he also admits that maybe you shouldn't call a trick play after a serial killer like Michael Myers, let alone on a Halloween game on Monday night where Amari Cooper tries to throw a ball away and instead it gets intercepted.
Yeah, that one I got worried when I first saw the clip on Twitter because they didn't specify it was Michael Myers. I thought he legitimately was going to name a play after a legitimate true crime podcast serial killer, and I'm thinking, oh boy. But if it's Michael Myers, who cares? He's not even real. I'm sure there's someone who's like him that's real, but there's no one that we know of. Um, you bring up a good point with the him being human. I do kind of like that he addressed the stoicism that he has to kind of put the front on for games, because I think a lot of people turned on Stefanski's stoicism last season and maybe into the second year because we just weren't winning. We just weren't getting the job done. And it gets to a point where it feels like you don't have passion for what you're doing. And I even addressed that. The fact I was talking with somebody about this is that Stefanski doesn't have that connection, that personal connection that we are going to have as fans, that people who grew up here are going to have with the Browns. He talked about the Steelers victory in the playoff game. And people will come up to him and say, "Thank you for that. That was my Super Bowl." And he's like, "No, man, I want to win it. I want to win the Super Bowl."
Yeah.
And I'm like, you know what? That's a good attitude, way of thinking. But he doesn't recognize. It's hard for him to recognize those sort of personal connections. And if he stays there long enough, it can kind of creep in as well. But going back to his kind of blank faced stoicism, I like that he puts on that front, win or lose, because it can be as much as you can think, oh, a coach doesn't care if he's putting on that front after a loss. I think he cares enough. It's when you get those guys who are a little more showy and a little more full of emotion that when you win, it's amazing. You can kind of bask in that as well if you're a fan. If you lose, you almost it almost feels like repugnant. You become repulsed by this team and the way they're handling themselves, especially if the coach is doing that, because then it can allow the players to do the same. I'm more so on that philosophy of coaching, but I know that that's not for everybody.
Yes and no. To your point, I agree with a big reason for him is he doesn't want to get so emotional because he is the play caller.
Yeah.
He is the head coach. He doesn't want to get so emotional up here. You got to do it so the people that are watching can see, to a point where he can't get back down to even keel.
Yeah.
I think our biggest issue last year as fans, Mitch, and just people that watch football, there was nobody on the Browns sideline that were any coaches that could get fired up. That's going to change this year, though. Bubba Ventrone is a very fiery, passionate football coach. Jim Schwartz has already told you he holds guys accountable. It felt like last year there was no accountability on the defense, right? I mean, how many times did we see blown coverages happen?
Yeah.
Suspending Grant Delpit for the first play or first drive of the game. What kind of accountability is that? I mean, now you have Jim Schwartz who says, I'm going to hold all players accountable, Myles Garrett included. You have Bubba Ventrone who's going to come in here, who's a fiery football coach, has a personality, and he's played here. So maybe he gets it a little bit more compared to other coaches that have not been here. So I think you're already going to see a slight dynamic shift in terms of the energy and emotion on the sidelines, to where now we don't have to really go after Kevin, because I truly believe there was nobody last year on that Browns sideline other than players getting into it with each other, which you don't necessarily always want to see. I think that now we can kind of understand why Kevin's like that, because look, Sean McVay, for example, Mitch, he can get fired up. We've seen it before watching them. We've seen him do it in the Super Bowl, and he's good at coming down. But if Kevin's never been like that, you can't ask a man who has one job out of 32 in the world to be somebody he's not. But what you can do is ask him to go get guys that are going to help fix something that the team is lacking. And I think they've done that so far this year.
I do like that sort of sentiment that we can bring in some more pure, this isn't even a term, but I'm going to make it up right now. Purely football coaches to come in and kind of mix them up with the guys who are a little more analytical, a little more calculated. That's kind of where I'm thinking with Schwartz and Ventrone. Although who knows if those coaches are going to make the biggest differences with Stefanski still calling the plays. Time will tell if it's going to be the right choice to allow him to keep making the offensive decisions, because if you're 6 games in and this offense still can't get itself around with the talent that you have, there's going to be some serious changes, I'm sure. And then the last thing I wanted to bring up before we go on to our next topic is, did you hear him talk about his experience when he had to miss the playoff game against Pittsburgh because he got the coronavirus? Okay.
Yep.
So he brought up a point, and I can attest, I could probably see this happening to him. It is hard. It is a very out of body experience to be watching your team play an actual game, a postseason game, mind you, and you can't do anything about it. You're stuck in your own basement, and he's kind of just sitting there, and he talks about like, oh yeah, I was kind of pacing around. It's like I was calling the plays, like I had my a call sheet with me, and I was thinking to myself, okay, I'm trying to picture right now Kevin Stefanski in his home. He's got some chamomile on the coffee table right next to him, maybe a nice bowl of soup. And then you have like Brown's flannel pajamas, some sort of t-shirt. And then you just have him this is the flattest thing I have, like walking around like this, like panicking around, being like, all right, guys, God, I hope they call this play. God, come on. Prefer just call the freaking play. And then that was where I was like legitimately losing it in the car, picturing that mental image in my own head. Um, but yeah, that was really cool. And they even asked, like, do you have a playoff win? And he's like, technically. And that was where I was like, that was kind of one where they're like, did you hear them say it's like, oh, we got to ask a question for the Cleveland media to stir up? First of all, I felt called out by it, but then second of all, barely anybody brought that up on the shows today, because that's where I was like, oh, they tried to. I don't know. Look, all respect out to Big Cat and commentator. Um, but yeah, I would definitely go recommend checking out their show along with that recent interview with Kevin Stefanski. So that's cool.
You think he was do you think he had headset on too? Like, if he plays Madden like he claims he does, he also has
Oh,
kids that might have a gaming system. Like I have a complete different headset with a mic when I'm playing PlayStation. Yeah, you think he was walking around with that on his head too while he's pacing his basement during the 2020 game?
I could see that. I don't necessarily know if it's this one in particular. It feels too bulky. I could see the one that you sometimes doesn't Xbox sometimes give you a headset in your new console box. I think that's the one you probably could get, the really cheap, crappy one that everybody has to go buy one of those to
I
replace. Yeah.
I wish there could have been a camera on him, because I wish I would have, like, watching the game and then wondering, is he walking around with the sheet going, okay, here I would call I'm calling this play here, and then he's watching. He's like, no, don't call that. Oh, we scored. Okay, good play.
I can almost bet you that when the COVID season happened and we were going into it, some TV executives probably wondered, hey, if we have coaches that are out this week or players that are out, can we get like some sort of setup in their houses? But nobody's going to want, especially a public eye NFL head coach like that, is going to want any images of their homes,
Right,
aside from
exactly.
the outside, which people can see probably in a
Well,
neighborhood.
it could be considered cheating too, but at the same time, a professional
Well, maybe,
seems
but I mean,
wrong.
if it's on the
So,
television broadcast, what Browns player or coach is going to be watching the television broadcast and like keeping tabs? It doesn't matter.